Imagine walking through an airport. The pilot's wings on your uniform gleaming, passengers and staff greeting you with respect. But what if it was all a lie? What if you were actually a teenage runaway, masquerading in a life of deception? This is the story of Frank Abagnale, one of the most brilliant con artists in history. Frank Abagnale's journey into the world of fraud began at a young age. Born in 1948 in Bronxville, New York, his early exposure to financial instability and familial strife laid the foundation for what would become a legendary career in deception. By the age of 16, Abagnale had already embarked on his path of trickery and deceit. His first scam? Manipulating his own bank account with forged checks. Little did the world know this was just the beginning. With each successful forgery, Frank's confidence grew. The streets of Bronxville, once a playground for innocent childhood games, now became the backdrop for his rapidly developing skills in deceit. Frank was dreaming bigger now. He started planning to trick banks not just in his town, but all over. He had a map with lots of marks on it, each one a new place to try his tricks. To cash his checks, Frank had a big idea. What if he could look like someone really important, like an airline pilot? He knew that would make his scams even easier.
People trusts pilots, right?
So, he decided to become a pilot, at least to everyone who didn't know him. Frank watched real pilots and learned how they acted. He even made himself a fake pilot ID. It looked so real. Next, he needed a uniform. Frank was clever. He tricked a uniform store into giving him a real Pan Am pilot uniform. When he put it on, he looked just like a real pilot. Now, dressed as a pilot, Frank walked through airports. People saw him and thought he was a real pilot. They smiled and respected him. Frank felt great. His plan was working. Frank's fake ID let him travel on deadhead flights. That's when pilots fly for free to get to another airport for their next flight. He flew over 1 million miles, from one big city to another, and it didn't cost him anything. Being a pilot wasn't just about flying. Frank stayed in fancy hotels and ate great food. Everyone thought he was a real pilot, so he got to live like one. It was a fun life for him. But sometimes, Frank would look at his fake ID and pilot uniform and think about what he was doing. He was living a lie, and he knew it couldn't last forever. But for now, he was flying high in more ways than one. With his pilot uniform, Frank wasn't just traveling, he was also tricking banks everywhere. He'd walk into a bank, all dressed up, and no one doubted him. He cashed check after check, and because he was a pilot, the tellers just trusted him. Every successful trick made Frank bolder. He traveled across the country, from New York to Miami, even to faraway places like Tokyo. Everywhere he went, he left a trail of fake checks and fooled people. But it wasn't always easy. A few times, bank people got suspicious. Frank had to talk fast and use his charm. And guess what? It worked. He always found a way to slip away before anyone figured out the truth. Frank Abagnale relished a life of luxury, but it was built on lies. Sometimes he wondered,
Was it all worth it?
Meanwhile, the police were starting to figure out his tricks, slowly unraveling his trail of fraud. Frank didn't know it, but he wouldn't be free for much longer. After flying high as a pilot, Frank wanted a new challenge. What about being a doctor, he thought. That would be exciting. So, he decided to become Dr. Frank, just like that. Frank didn't know much about medicine, but he was good at learning fast. He read some medical books, learned the lingo, and just like that, he was ready. He even got a job at a hospital in Georgia. Dr. Frank was popular at the hospital. He was friendly, and people liked him. He always found ways to avoid doing real doctor stuff, though. He let the other doctors do the hard work. It wasn't all smooth, though. One time, during an emergency, Frank almost got caught. He had no idea what to do, but he was quick. He said he wasn't feeling well and left the room fast.
I think I'm not feeling well.
Being a fake doctor was tricky. Frank knew he couldn't do it for long. So, after a while, he decided it was time to move on. What would be his next big act? Frank had a new plan. What if he became a lawyer? He always liked arguing and was good with words. So why not? He started his next big trick. Frank studied a little about law this time. He found a way to take the bar exam in Louisiana. He didn't pass the first time, but guess what? He kept trying and finally did it. As a lawyer, Frank was convincing. He got a job in a law office, and no one suspected he wasn't a real lawyer. He wore the right suits, said the right things, and fit right in. Frank was living another lie, and he knew it. As he sat in his law office, he looked at the degree on his wall. It was all fake. He started to feel that this life, too, was getting risky. Things were heating up. The police were closing in, and Frank knew he couldn't stay a lawyer for much longer. He needed to disappear, to go somewhere far. Europe, he thought. That's where I'll go next, off to Europe. Frank felt a rush as he boarded the plane. New countries, new people, new banks to trick. It was a fresh start, but the danger was always close behind. In Europe, Frank kept up his tricks. He traveled from country to country, always staying one step ahead of the law. His bag of fake checks and IDs was his ticket to a world of adventure. But in Europe, things were different. The police were on high alert, and Frank had some close calls. He was smart, though, always managing to slip away just in time. Finally, Frank's luck ran out. The French police, who had been gathering evidence and tracking his activities, finally caught him. His consistent pattern of cashing forged checks had left a trail that the authorities pieced together, leading to his capture. Without any viable way to escape, Frank was arrested, and his world of lies came crashing down. Behind bars in France, Frank had time to think about everything he had done. The scams, the travels, the lies. It was all over now. He realized the excitement wasn't worth the price he had to pay. After a grueling 6 months in France, he was extradited to Sweden, finding himself once again behind bars. But it wasn't the end of his prison journey. He was soon sent back to the United States to face further justice. In the U.S., Frank faced a daunting 12-year sentence for his forgeries. However, his fate took a surprising turn after serving just 4 years. The U.S. government, recognizing his unique skill set, offered him a deal.
Here is the deal, Frank. If you help the FBI learn how to catch other fraudsters like you will be released from prison.
Seeing a chance to turn his life around, Frank agreed. This decision marked a new chapter in Frank's life. From a notorious con artist, he transformed into an invaluable asset for the FBI, using his expertise in fraud and deception to help them understand and fight these crimes more effectively. Frank Abagnale's story, once defined by deceit and cunning, took a turn towards redemption and service.